She was just a janitor to everyone else, an overweight single mother pushing a mop down hospital hallways no one cared about. But that night, under the icy glare of the ER lights, Grace Alvarez watched 22 doctors surround a dying young woman and fail. Her heart clenched with a sadness she knew too well, the kind born from years of being overlooked, dismissed, forgotten. Then came fear. The girl's pulse plummeted, her lips turned blue, and the billionaire father behind the glass pounded the window with a desperation that shook the entire room. Grace felt it in her bones. She had seen this before, in war zones, in dust, in blood. And she knew exactly what was killing the girl. But when she whispered one word, "Stop," the room froze. A janitor had interrupted them. 22 physicians stared at her in shock. No one moved. No one believed her. Until the monitors began to flatline. And in that split second, as chaos erupted, Grace stepped forward. Not as a janitor, but as the doctor she had once been. What happened next stunned the world and led to a miracle that would heal more than one life. The emergency room looked like a war zone. 22 doctors and specialists swarmed around the young woman convulsing on the gurney. Monitors screamed in red, lines spiking and crashing. Nurses barked codes. Someone shouted for another medication. Someone else for a crash cart. Beneath the blinding lights, the patient's body jerked uncontrollably, foam white against lips that were turning a frightening shade of blue. Outside the glass, a tall man in a tailored charcoal suit stood ramrod straight, fists clenched behind his back. His salt and pepper hair, perfect tie, and polished shoes screamed control, power, money, but his eyes were pure panic. "Nobody in this room is allowed to let my daughter die," he said, voice low but shaking. "Do you understand me? 22 of you, and no one can tell me what's happening to her?" No one answered. In the far corner, near a yellow "Caution, wet floor" sign, a woman in a faded Navy custodial uniform paused with a mop in her hands. Grace Alvarez, 40 years old, plus-size and soft-faced, looked more like someone's favorite aunt than a former Army trauma surgeon. Her curly dark hair was pulled into a messy bun under a hospital cap. Her sneakers were cheap and worn. The plastic badge on her chest read, "Grace A., Environmental Services." What it did not mention, former Captain Grace Alvarez, MD, U.S. Army Medical Corps, 3 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. Dozens of soldiers pulled back from the edge of death. Or that 5 years ago, a panel led by then Brigadier General Nathaniel Cross had stripped her of everything. She watched the monitors now with the same focused gaze she'd used in field hospitals overseas. Heart rate, blood pressure, oxygen saturation. She tracked the rise and fall of the seizure activity, the timing, the pattern. Her nostrils flared, catching the faint chemical tang in the air. Her eyes went to the girl's lips, then her fingers, then the IV bag they were about to hang. Something was all wrong. Hours earlier, Grace's day had begun in a very different world. In a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of Baltimore, the radiator hissed like it had a grudge, and a slow drip from the kitchen ceiling plunked into a bowl on the floor. The smell of cheap coffee and cinnamon toast filled the air. "Mom, I can't find my other shoe," 9-year-old Mia called, hopping on one foot. "It's under the couch, baby," Grace answered, not looking up from the stove. "It's always under the couch, like it lives there." Mia dove, emerging with the missing sneaker and a dust bunny. "You were right again." "Don't sound so surprised," Grace said, finally turning with a plate of eggs. Her face was round, her body heavy, but there was a glow in her brown eyes that no exhaustion could dull. A small silver cross sparkled at her throat. On the fridge, a handwritten Bible verse was held up by a chipped magnet. He heals the broken-hearted and binds up their wounds. Grace murmured it under her breath as she set the plate down. Not because everything in her life was healed, far from it, but because saying the words reminded her that broken didn't mean useless. "Are you working late again?" Mia asked between bites. "Yeah," Grace sighed. "Night shift at the fancy hospital where nobody knows your mama used to be a doctor?" Mia tilted her head. "But God knows, right?" That made Grace smile. "Yeah, God knows." He also knew the rest. That 5 years ago, in a dusty Afghan village, a gas canister had exploded and released a toxic cloud. American soldiers and local families had fallen, choking. A high-ranking officer with mild exposure had demanded immediate care, while children lay blue-lipped on the ground. Protocol said, "Treat the officer first." Grace had looked at the children and refused. She treated them anyway. The kids had lived. The officer had recovered, furious at having to wait. The court-martial had been fast and merciless. Insubordination. Failure to follow orders, loss of license, dishonorable discharge. The man who'd signed off on her professional death sentence. Brigadier General Nathaniel Cross. Now Nathaniel Cross was no longer in uniform. He was Nathan Cross, billionaire CEO of Crossline Global, owner of half the medical tech in the building, and major donor to the very hospital where Grace mopped floors for a living. She hadn't known that when she took the job. She knew it now. Back in the ER, a nurse shouted, "Sodium's still pending. We need to control these seizures." "Hang the saline," the attending ordered. "And push another dose of—" Grace saw the bluish hue around the young woman's mouth, the faint ammonia scent in the air, the particular rigid, cramping rhythm of the muscles. Not neurological. Electrolytes. Severe hyponatremia, critically low sodium, brain swelling. And they were about to hang a bag that wouldn't fix it fast enough. Her heart pounded. She could feel the weight of her cross against her skin. "You promised," she reminded herself. "You promised to heal when you could, even when it costs you." Inside the glass box, the nurse spiked the IV bag. Outside, Nathan Cross slammed his palm against the window. "Do something!" Grace set the mop aside. For a heartbeat, fear pinned her in place. She saw again the tribunal, the cold faces, the ink on the paper that had shredded her life. Then she pictured Mia's face, and she heard another voice, quieter than the chaos. "When you know the right thing and stay silent, that's its own kind of lie." Before she could talk herself out of it, Grace pushed open the ER doors and walked straight into the storm. "Stop," she said, her voice cutting through the shouting. Every head turned toward the obese woman in the janitor's uniform. "Don't hang that bag," Grace said, eyes locked on the IV. "You're about to kill her." For 3 full seconds, no one in the emergency room moved. 22 medical professionals froze mid-action, staring at the overweight janitor who had dared to interrupt them. The attending physician, Dr. Howard Ellington, turned slowly, disbelief sharpening his expression. "Ma'am, this is a sterile—" "You hang that saline," Grace said firmly, pointing at the IV. "And her brain is going to swell until her heart stops." The room cracked open with murmurs. Dr. Ellington stiffened. "This is not your place. Security!" Grace stepped forward, palms raised, voice steady in a way that carried more authority than her uniform ever could. "Look at her lips," she said. "Cyanotic. But not the patchy kind you get with neurological seizures. This is systemic." A resident hesitated. glancing from the patient's mouth back to Grace. Her hands, Grace continued, lifting her own as a demonstration. See the spasms? That's tetany, electrolyte-driven, not neurological. And smell the air. Several nurses paused mid-movement. That faint ammonia tang. Grace pointed at the monitor. Her body is drowning from the inside out. Sodium crash, severe hyponatremia. If you give her isotonic saline, it won't correct anything. She needs hypertonic solution, 3% sodium chloride, 100 milliliters over 10 minutes. Silence pulsed like a heartbeat. Then a small voice broke it. She's right. All eyes swung to Dr. Riley Park, a soft-spoken second-year resident who'd been scanning the preliminary labs. His face was pale. Sodium just came back, he said. It's 81. A collective gasp rippled across the room. 90 is critical, another doctor whispered. 81, my God! The attending scowled. There must be a lab error. Run it again. No error, Dr. Park said, swallowing. It's real. Now the panic was visible. In the corner, the billionaire CEO, Nathan Cross, the man who built empires with a handshake, leaned closer to the glass, breath fogging the window. His daughter Layla lay dying on the gurney, and the only person who seemed to understand what was happening was a janitor in discount sneakers. Dr. Ellington tried to regain control. Even if she's right, we don't diagnose based on smell and nail beds. That's folk medicine. Grace's voice stayed calm. I used those same observations in 3 war zones when labs were down and lives were seconds from slipping away. This isn't mysticism. It's pattern recognition. And right now, you're treating the wrong pattern. A nurse whispered, if we move too slow, she's gone. Another countered, if we correct too fast, she could suffer permanent brain damage. Grace nodded. Which is why you titrate carefully. Hypertonic solution, controlled rate, monitor cardiac rhythm, and stop that benzodiazepine order. It's worsening the spasms. How do you know that? Ellington snapped, and that was the moment Nathan Cross stormed through the ER doors. His presence was commanding, too commanding for anyone to argue with. What are you people waiting for? He barked. My daughter is dying. Dr. Ellington pointed at Grace. Sir, this woman is not medical staff. She does not have credentials. I don't give a damn about credentials, Nathan thundered. Did any of you figure out what's killing her? Silence. Then Nathan turned to Grace. Do you know what's happening to my daughter? Grace looked directly into his eyes, the same eyes that had once stared her down from a tribunal bench 5 years earlier, but his face showed no recognition now. I know enough to save her, she said. If you let me. The entire ER held its breath. Nathan's jaw tightened. Power, fear, and desperation warred across his face. Then, quietly, but with the authority of a man used to being obeyed, let her work. Dr. Ellington sputtered. Sir, this could get the hospital sued. Nathan's voice became ice. Then I will assume the liability. No one argued after that. The hypertonic saline was brought. Grace adjusted the drip herself, fingers steady, movements precise. Not the motions of a janitor, but the choreography of a surgeon who had saved men under fire. No sudden correction, she murmured. We're guiding her back, not yanking. Her hand hovered over Layla's wrist, feeling the pulse. Weak, thready, fading. Grace applied pressure to a specific point between the ribs and shoulder, her thumb firm but controlled. What's that? Dr. Park asked quietly. Vagal stimulation, Grace whispered. Helps reset cardiac rhythm. Learned it from a field medic in Mosul. Saved 3 soldiers with it. Seconds crawled. 20, 30, 60. The spikes on the monitor softened. The violent jerks slowed. The purplish tinge faded from Layla's lips. A minute later, the line on the ECG steadied into a clean sinus rhythm. The girl's breathing deepened. Her chest rose, then fell. Grace exhaled. She's stabilizing. A nurse burst into tears. Dr. Park pressed a hand to his forehead. Ellington stared as if witnessing a miracle. Behind them all, Nathan Cross dropped into a chair, burying his face in his hands, shoulders shaking with relief. Layla lived, because the janitor said stop. For a long moment after Layla stabilized, the emergency room was silent. Not the frantic silence of panic, but the stunned quiet of people realizing they had just been outrun, outdiagnosed, and outclassed by a woman holding a hospital mop. Then everything happened at once. A swarm of administrators stormed in, legal officers, senior physicians, security. What's going on here? Who authorized this woman in the ER? She touched a patient without credentials? Where's Dr. Ellington? Grace backed away from the gurney, hands raised, palms open. She wasn't panicked, more resigned. This wasn't her first time being punished for saving a life. Dr. Patricia Colton, the hospital's chief medical director, marched forward in her immaculate white coat. Her tone could cut steel. Ms. Alvarez, step into my office, now. Nathan Cross rose from his chair, eyes red but burning. She saved my daughter. Dr. Colton didn't even blink, and she has violated half a dozen federal regulations in the process. Grace met Nathan's eyes, calm, steady, unexpectedly gentle. It's okay, she whispered. Go be with Layla. She followed the administrators down the hall like a soldier walking toward a familiar battlefield. The office was small, harshly lit, and cold. 2 security guards stood by the door. Dr. Colton sat behind her desk, fingers laced tightly. Ms. Alvarez, she began, you practiced medicine without a license tonight. Grace said nothing. You administered treatment. You physically manipulated a patient. You directed staff. All of this is illegal. Grounds for immediate termination and possible prosecution. Still, Grace remained silent. Finally, Dr. Colton snapped, Do you have anything to say in your defense? Grace folded her hands in her lap. Layla Cross would be dead if I hadn't intervened. That is not your determination to make, Colton snapped. You do not get to decide what is right simply because you believe it. That is why we have rules. Grace lowered her gaze. Yes, ma'am. Her quiet acceptance seemed to frustrate Colton even more. Effective immediately, you are suspended. Surrender your badge. Grace unclipped her ID card, placed it gently on the desk, and stood. But before she left, she turned, voice soft but firm. Ma'am, your doctors almost reached the right conclusion. They were close, they're good. They just didn't have the battlefield experience I did. Colton froze. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in her eyes. Grace walked out, collected her things, her daughter's picture, her worn Bible, her grandmother's rosary, and stepped into the cold night air. Suspended. Again. For saving the wrong person in the wrong way. Her life had a cruel pattern. The next morning, the entire hospital buzzed. Did you hear? A janitor diagnosed what 22 doctors missed. Layla Cross survived because of her. Didn't she used to be in the army? Someone said she was court-martialed. In a quiet corner of the cafeteria, a veteran nurse named Meredith Shaw overheard the gossip. Her brow narrowed. Grace Alvarez. She remembered that name. 5 years ago, she had seen the military report. a doctor discharged for insubordination. Something in it had never sat right with her. Now it made perfect sense. Meredith's instincts kicked in. She marched to records, dug through the archives, and unearthed the truth, suppressed testimonies from soldiers, all praising Grace as the medic who saved them, who chose dying children over protocol. Reports that had been buried under the influence of one powerful, vengeful officer. Her heart hammered. Someone needed to see this. Someone who had the power to undo the damage. Someone sitting upstairs at that very moment, keeping vigil beside his recovering daughter. On the 4th floor, Nathan Cross sat alone in a dimmed private suite. Layla slept peacefully, hooked to a steady IV, her color fully returned. Nathan hadn't slept. His mind replayed everything, the chaos, the terror, the janitor who held herself with more authority than the entire medical staff combined, the janitor who knew exactly what to do. A knock sounded. Meredith stepped inside. "Mr. Cross, I think you need to see something." She handed him a thick file. Nathan opened it. The first page was Grace's military photo. Round face, warm eyes, hair tied back, wearing her Army Medical Corps uniform. The following pages were testimonies. "Corporal Jenkins, Captain Alvarez saved my platoon when we were hit with neurotoxic gas. She treated the kids first. She was right to. Lute Ramirez. She saved my life twice. Losing her was a crime. Private Owens. The officer she was court-martialed over barely had symptoms. And then, a signature Nathan recognized instantly. Brigadier General Nathaniel Cross. His own hand. On the paper that had ended her career. His breath caught. His daughter lived because of a woman he had unknowingly destroyed. Nathan closed the file with trembling hands. "Oh God," he whispered. "What have I done?" Nathan Cross sat motionless for a long time, the damning file resting heavy on his knees. He had spent a lifetime believing he understood justice, leadership, and honor. But the truth staring back at him revealed something else entirely. He had destroyed the career of the woman who saved his daughter. The weight of that realization settled over him like wet cement. When his phone finally buzzed, he nearly dropped it. "Mr. Cross?" It was Dr. Riley Park. "Layla is awake, and she's asking for the woman who helped her." Nathan swallowed hard. "Where is she?" "She left the hospital last night, suspended." A silence stretched. Then Nathan stood. "Call security. Call administration. Someone is going to find her for me. Tonight." On the other side of the city, Grace Alvarez's apartment was filled with the smell of pancakes and the sound of Mia humming off-key. Grace tried to act normal, smiling, joking, but her heart felt like it had sunk into her stomach. "Mom," Mia said, poking at her breakfast. "Why aren't you going to work today?" Grace brushed a curl from her daughter's forehead. "Because Mama needs a little time off, honey." "Did you get in trouble?" Mia's voice was soft. Grace hesitated. Lying wasn't in her nature. "A little." Mia nodded slowly. "Because you saved that lady?" Grace's chest tightened. "Yeah, because I saved her." Mia considered this. Then she shrugged and said with pure, childlike wisdom, "Jesus got in trouble for doing good things too." Grace's breath hitched, and her eyes burned. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost let it ring out, but answered on instinct. "Ms. Alvarez?" A soft, clear voice. Young, steady. "This is Layla Cross. You saved my life, and I'd really like to see you." Grace nearly dropped the phone. "Layla, are you—" "I'm okay," Layla whispered. "And my father wants to speak with you too." If you're willing. Grace's stomach twisted. Nathan Cross, the man whose signature had ended her calling, the man who didn't remember her, the man who now owed her everything. Part of her wanted to say no, but another part, the part that never stopped believing God wrote stories in crooked lines, whispered, "Go." "I'll come," Grace said quietly. That evening, after taking Mia to a neighbor's apartment, Grace rode the bus back toward the gleaming white hospital she never thought she'd enter again. Dr. Riley Park met her at the lobby. "She's upstairs, waiting." His voice was warm, respectful, different. Grace followed him down the quiet hall until he stopped at a private suite. He opened the door. Inside, Layla sat upright in her hospital bed, pale but smiling softly. Nathan sat beside her. No suit, no power armor, just a man with weary eyes and guilt etched into every line of his face. When Grace entered, Layla whispered, "That's her." Grace stood awkwardly just inside the doorway. Layla reached out a fragile hand. "Come sit, please." Grace forced her legs to move. "Thank you," Layla whispered, voice trembling. "You saved my life. They told me what you saw, what they didn't." Grace tried to smile. "I'm just glad you're okay." But Nathan stood suddenly, and Grace froze. If guilt had a human form, it was him. "Ms. Alvarez," he began, voice rough, "I owe you an apology." "No," Grace said softly. "You don't—" "Yes," Nathan said sharply, almost desperate. "I do. 5 years ago, I presided over a tribunal. I judged a situation I did not understand. I signed a decision that tore your life apart. A decision made in arrogance, in blind trust of the wrong man." Grace's throat tightened. Nathan stepped closer, but slowly, as if approaching someone sacred. "You saved my daughter," he whispered, "when you had every reason to walk away. Every reason to let me feel the pain I caused you." Grace looked at the floor. "It wasn't about you." "I know," Nathan said. "That's what shames me most." He swallowed hard. "I can't give you back 5 years of your life. But I am going to fight to clear your name. I will go before every board, every committee. I will testify until they listen. I will give everything I have to make this right." Grace closed her eyes. She had dreamed of hearing words like these, but never expected them. When she found her voice, it was soft, fragile, and full of truth. "I didn't save Layla because of who you are. I saved her because of who I am. Because healing is still the only thing I know." Nathan bowed his head, an act of humility so profound it almost hurt to witness. "Then let me help you heal too," he whispered. And for the first time in 5 years, Grace felt something she thought she had lost forever. Hope. The weeks that followed moved like a tide. Slow at first, then unstoppable. Nathan Cross kept his word. He hired investigators, attorneys, military liaisons. He tracked down every soldier whose testimony had been buried. He found emails, reports, deathbed confessions from the officer who had orchestrated Grace's downfall. And he prepared a case so airtight, so undeniably truthful, that even the Department of Defense couldn't ignore it. But the part that shocked Grace most wasn't the legal effort. It was the dinners. Every Saturday evening, she and Mia found themselves driving, riding the bus, to Nathan's penthouse overlooking the inner harbor. A place so elegant it felt unreal. Mia would flatten her hands against the windows, marveling at the glittering skyline. "Mom," she whispered once, "do rich people live in the clouds?" Grace chuckled. "Some do, but some just let you look at the view." Inside the penthouse, Nathan's daughter Layla would greet Mia like a long-lost cousin, guiding her to a telescope set up by the balcony. "You like science?" Layla asked. "I like stars," Mia said shyly. "They make me feel less small." Layla smiled softly. "They make me feel the same way." Nathan, meanwhile, attempted to cook every week. Attempted was generous. Grace quickly learned the powerful CEO couldn't scramble an egg without burning water. One night, the smoke alarm screeched as he pulled a charred pan from the stove. Mia giggled uncontrollably. "Mr. Nathan, stick to money." Grace covered her face, mortified. But Nathan laughed, really laughed, like a man rediscovering a muscle he hadn't used in years. "He's not so bad," Mia whispered later to Layla. "Just needs practice." Layla grinned. "He's better at running companies than running ovens." But every dinner ended the same way. All of them, Grace, Mia, Layla, Nathan, standing hand in hand around the table while Mia said grace. "Lord, thank you for letting broken people find each other," she prayed one night. "And thank you that Miss Layla didn't die." Nathan squeezed Grace's hand a little harder at that. 3 months after the night in the ER, the military tribunal convened in Washington, D.C. The courtroom buzzed with cameras, reporters, and officials. The story of the janitor who saved a billionaire's daughter had spread across the country. But what the world didn't yet know was that she had once been one of the Army's most gifted combat surgeons. Grace entered the courtroom in a modest dress, clutching her grandmother's rosary in her palm. Mia sat beside Layla in the front row, legs swinging nervously. Nathan stood at the podium, wearing the suit of a man who knew exactly how to command a room. But this time, not for power, for truth. 5 years ago, Nathan began steadily, I helped destroy the career of Captain Grace Alvarez. Today, I stand before you to correct my greatest mistake. He presented every buried testimony, every suppressed report, every plea from soldiers whose lives Grace had saved. Then he said, voice breaking, "My daughter is alive because Captain Alvarez refused to stop healing, even when the world punished her for it." The courtroom fell silent. When the board returned 2 hours later, the lead officer read the verdict. Captain Grace Alvarez, your dishonorable discharge is hereby overturned. All ranks and commendations are restored. You are offered reinstatement to active duty, or honorable discharge with full medical licensing support. Mia squeezed her hands together, whispering, "Say the doctor won, Mom. Say the doctor won." Grace's voice trembled. "I choose honorable discharge and a path back to medicine." The room erupted in applause. Nathan closed his eyes, overcome. Layla clapped through tears. Mia threw both hands in the air and shouted, "My mom's a doctor again!" 1 year later, the ribbon-cutting ceremony drew hundreds. The Alvarez Cross Center for Community Health stood proudly in a renovated warehouse in East Baltimore. Bright murals on the walls, medicinal gardens outside, exam rooms combining modern technology with the folk wisdom Grace learned from her grandmother. Grace stepped to the microphone, her white coat fitting her shoulders like destiny. "I was mopping hospital floors a year ago," she said. "But tonight I stand here because compassion won over protocol, because people believed in second chances, and because a little girl reminded me that broken doesn't mean finished." Mia beamed. Layla squeezed Nathan's arm, and Nathan, eyes softer than anyone had ever seen, whispered, "This is what honor looks like." Grace looked at them. Her daughter, the girl she saved, and the man she forgave. A family not built by blood, but by healing, by redemption, by grace.